this video, we're going to look at invoices and the Studio Financials section of NIM. The Studio Finances track invoice statuses as well as the overall billing status of jobs. Also includes an overview of expenses as well as the payroll calculations for any crew members using payroll rules. To view the Studio Financials, go to the Studio menu and click on Financials. This will load the Financials overview. In the Overview dashboard, you'll see the invoice totals, the amount not sent, accounts receivable, overdue, amount paid, and outstanding balance. These values are all determined by the invoice status of the individual invoices logged against a job. The date range for the overview is determined by the filter at the top right. The default range is 3 months, but in this case, I'm viewing a date range from 2017 through 2018. You can also select individual jobs as well. Our invoices timeline shows us the amount of money not sent, what's in accounts receivable, what's overdue, and what is paid. In this case, I can see that I was carrying over $2 million in accounts receivable, and then later in the year, that was brought down to around $1 million. We can view this information by the start and end date selected, year over year, or also quarter over quarter, and be able to compare that information to the prior quarters. Now, all of this information is derived from invoices inside of jobs. Here, I went into a job, and I'm looking at the individual invoices logged on that job. Each invoice allows you to set the invoice number. It logs who it was created by. There's a brief description for the invoice. Each invoice can have its own selected currency, the total amount for the invoice, and then there are 4 dates that help determine the overall status of that invoice: the scheduled date, sent, due, and paid. The scheduled date is the date at which the invoice needs to be sent out. The sent date is the date at which the invoice was sent. The due date is the date the invoice is due, and the paid date is the date the invoice was paid. Now, based off of this information within the job, we can determine the overall invoice status as well as the overall billing status for the job. Producers can gain visibility to these invoices directly within the Job Invoices section, and the accounting department can work directly from the Studio Financials. Clicking on the Billing tab, we can actually see the list of jobs that fall within the selected date range. We can see the job status, but now we can also see the billing status, and that billing status is determined by the combined invoice status. In the grid, we can see our actual total, invoice total, what's not been sent, accounts receivable, overdue, paid, the outstanding balance, and how much has not been invoiced for each individual job. Clicking on a row, we can see all of the invoices that have been logged to that job, and clicking on an invoice, we can see the invoice details. Going to the ellipsis menu, we have the option to go directly to the job invoices, or we can edit this invoice in place, delete it, or again close the panel. We can filter this view by any particular job status, and we can also export this information by clicking on the Excel button. Within this view, please note that only jobs with an awarded bid or an invoice are included in this list. Clicking on the Invoices tab, we can see each individual invoice that has been created. Again, clicking on an invoice lets us modify that invoice directly. Moving over to our Expenses tab, we can see all expenses that have been logged against the job. Users can review overall expenses studio-wide, as well as edit any individual invoice that has been created. To create new expenses, go into the Job menu and click on Expenses in the Production section. Here we can review any information for any current expenses that have been added to the job, as well as add a new expense by clicking on the plus button at the top right of the grid. We can choose our expense type, transaction type of debit or credit, enter a company name, description, choose our currency for the expense, the overall value, payment method, as well as the location, and you can flag if this was a third-party cost. Now, returning back to our Studio Financials, within our grid, we can filter by any one particular expense type. Say we only wanted to view our meals, for example, we can set the dropdown to just view our meals. You can also filter from any individual column menu to just see the items for a particular job, company, or location, for example. To reset the filters, go into the individual column and click Clear, or click the Reset Filters button from the top. We can also view our expenses as a combined chart. In this case, we're seeing our cost per location as well as the cost per expense type. Lastly, in our financials, we have our payroll section. The payroll tab displays the total calculated value per pay period based off of a user's payroll rules. In this case, we could see all users within the pay period that have entered time cards. We can see their base rate, their overtime rate, as well as their double time rate, the amount of standard hours, standard gross pay, any additional time type hours that they have entered, as well as overtime hours and gross, double time hours and gross, total hours, and total gross pay. We can review any individual day by going down into the days grid and clicking on a date. Here I can review the current time cards, see their submission status, and adjust any information as needed. In this case, I have a time card where the hours have been adjusted by a payroll rule, and I can choose to override that rule and reset the hours to the base hours entered. I can also click into any one time card and automatically approve or dispute those directly from this view. Once you've confirmed that all the time card information is correct, you can choose to resolve the time cards. You can resolve all or resolve selected time cards. Resolving the time cards will lock them from any future changes. We can also switch from the selected pay period to view any resolved time cards that have been resolved in the past. Clicking on a row will show those resolved time cards in the view below. We'll cover using and creating payroll rules separately in another video. And that is a brief overview of financials in NIM. For more information, please refer to the NIM documentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at support@nim-labs.com. Thank you.